When the silence in your mind becomes the loudest voice. Freud's deepest struggle. There were times when his mind wasn't filled with thoughts, just a crushing weight. It wasn't that he was overthinking, it was that thinking itself had become exhausting. Escaping his inner voice meant drowning in the noise of others. Even in silence, someone was always shouting inside his head. And perhaps the most unbearable part of it all was that even silence had become deafening. Can a man lose himself while trying to understand the world? Can someone disappear into their own darkness while trying to illuminate the minds of others? If that man's name was Freud, then yes, he could. And he did. When no one else understood him, he kept trying to understand himself. Because for Freud, searching for answers wasn't just intellectual, it was existential. But some questions are never meant to be answered. As time passed, the emptiness inside him deepened. When his father died, something else died with him. The world he trusted, the thoughts that once felt meaningful, the theories he built brick by brick, all shattered quietly. To the outside world, he still looked strong, but inside, he was crumbling, and no one could see it. One sentence he scribbled in his notebook would echo across the years. Loss is not always an external event. Sometimes the roof of the soul collapses from within. He set out to understand others, but no one could truly understand him. Even those closest to him began to drift away. Friends, colleagues, students, they left one by one or simply disappeared without a word. Until one morning, Freud looked up and found himself face to face with loneliness. No one was left inside. But the cruelest kind of loneliness is the one felt in the middle of a crowd. And Freud, despite the noise around him, was silent. Because now he wasn't just observing the world outside. He was staring into the abyss within. Once, he was a master of language. Now he was suffocating in his own words. Sometimes he would stare into a mirror for hours. Sometimes he would speak to nothing but paper for days. Writing became easier than thinking. Paper never judged. A pen never asked, "Why do you feel this way?" Only his own silence could hear the scream inside. During those long, empty days, Freud began to write again, but not in the way people think. Not essays, not theories, not books, just letters to himself. Sometimes they were meaningless words. Sometimes fragments of dreams from childhood. It was as if he was trying to fill the hollow space in his mind with language. And with every sentence, he reclaimed a small piece of himself. To Freud, depression wasn't just sadness. It was a slow rotting of the spirit. His inner aliveness had dimmed. Where joy once lived, now there was only a void, heavy, still, and endless. But then something shifted. Instead of fighting the emptiness, he looked at it. He tried to understand it. What if this darkness wasn't a curse, but a teacher? In that moment, he realized something profound. The soul doesn't heal by burying pain. It heals by facing it. Maybe darkness isn't an enemy. Maybe it's just a shadow carrying a message. And Freud, for the first time, dared to face his own shadow. In that shadow, he saw his childhood, his fears, his longing to be loved, his constant need for approval. All of it was still there. And for once, he didn't run. This realization began to change him. All the emotions he had buried for years began to rise. And Freud stopped fighting. He allowed it all. He grieved. He cried. Sometimes he screamed. Other times, he collapsed. But for the first time, he felt human. Not a thinker, not a theorist, just a soul, hurting and healing. And maybe that's why his writings still move people even today. Because they weren't just theories. They were whispers from a man who walked through the dark. His darkness didn't disappear, but he learned to listen to it. And in that listening, pain lost its poison. It became something else. Not a destroyer, but a force that reshaped him. Did his depression go away? But a new Freud was born from it. More fragile, more alone, but far more profound. And what about you? Have you ever tried to silence the emptiness within? Or have you tried to understand it? Have you ever asked yourself, why am I like this? Or have you always run away? If you're watching this, the questions are now yours to carry. And maybe, just maybe, it's time for you to be alone with yourself too. Leave a comment. Tell us honestly. Have you ever truly heard yourself? Maybe now is the time. Some pain can't be explained, can't be silenced, only lived. You wake up in the middle of the night. There's a weight in your chest. No clear reason, but the feeling is undeniable. It's like someone inside you is screaming in silence. Freud had nights like this. The world was quiet, but his thoughts were a raging choir. He realized that what he'd been trying to understand for so long was now consuming him. In trying to heal others, he had ignored his own wounds. One morning, he froze at his desk. He couldn't read. He couldn't write. His eyes drifted across books, but his mind was empty. He tried to create meaning to escape the void, but every answer led to another emptiness. That's when he understood something simple, yet profound. Some things aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be accepted. And that understanding marked a turning point. Because there's a subtle but powerful difference between solving something and listening to it. This time, Freud chose to listen. The darkness within him was no longer an enemy. It was perhaps a friend waiting to be heard. He stopped writing. He stopped speaking. He simply observed. He looked out the window and stared at the trees. Some were tall and strong. Others were wounded, scarred. Yet all of them still stood. That's when he began seeking peace with his own scars. For Freud, this period wasn't just a spiritual emptiness. It was purification, a kind of cleansing. It was proof that sometimes doing nothing is exactly what the soul needs. Because perhaps finding yourself doesn't begin with doing, but with choosing not to do. We try so hard sometimes, we don't even realize we're running. But when we stop, when we become still, when we turn inward, we meet the self we've been avoiding. And that meeting can either heal you or shatter you. Freud experienced both. Some days he'd sit at his desk, staring at a blank page. Other days he'd walk for hours without any destination. But slowly, something began to take shape inside him. A shadow, a silhouette forming from the dark. It had no name, no words. But it was real. And for the first time, Freud thought, maybe depression is the soul's way of speaking through the body. That thought gave his silence a new meaning. He no longer tried to silence the pain. He tried to hear it. Memories from the past began to rise. Childhood fears, feelings of rejection, longings for a love that never fully came. But instead of burying them again, he let them rise. And for the first time, he understood their silence. One night, he wrote in his journal, "Dark emotions deepen when suppressed. Maybe I need to make space for them instead of hiding them." That night, he cried. Maybe for the first time in years, he truly cried. Freud and the silent collapse. When the soul speaks louder than words. Sometimes, the mind isn't filled with thoughts. Sometimes it's just heavy, like trying to carry 1,000 invisible weights. For Freud, even thinking had become exhausting. He wasn't trying to escape his thoughts anymore. He was trying to escape himself. Even in silence, something screamed. Not a sound, but a pressure, deep, persistent, echoing in his skull. He would close his eyes to find peace, only to discover the storm was coming from within. Can a man get lost while trying to understand the world? Can someone who dedicates their life to decoding others' emotions lose touch with his own? If that man is named Freud, the answer is yes. No one could fully understand him, but he kept trying to understand himself. Because for Freud, this wasn't about theories, it was survival. But some questions aren't meant to be answered. Some are just meant to be felt. The day his father died, something shifted. Not just grief, something deeper, a collapse in his sense of meaning. The ideas he once built like monuments now felt like ruins. To the world, he still looked composed, but inside, something had already shattered. In one of his journals, Freud wrote, "Loss is not always an external tragedy. Sometimes it is the roof of the soul, caving in from within." He tried to understand people, but no one tried to understand him. One by one, his students left. His colleagues distanced themselves. The circle that once surrounded him dissolved. And one morning, Freud woke up to realize he was truly alone. But the worst kind of loneliness isn't being alone. It's being unseen in the middle of a crowd. And despite the noise of the world around him, Freud was living in silence, watching not just the outside, but also the void within. Once he commanded language. Now he was drowning in it. Sometimes he stared at the mirror, searching for a version of himself that felt real. Other times, he wrote to avoid thinking. Writing was easier. Paper didn't judge. Ink never interrupted. Only silence understood his screams. He began writing again, but not for anyone else. No theories, no science, just words for himself. Fragments of dreams, memories, nonsense, and pain. It was as if each sentence was stitching together the torn edges of his mind. To Freud, depression wasn't just sadness. It was spiritual decay, a fading of color. Joy had left the room. All that remained was stillness and wait. But one day, he stopped fighting the void and started watching it. And slowly, something remarkable happened. He began to understand that healing doesn't come from suppression. It comes from attention. That pain, when seen fully, loses its power to control. Maybe the darkness wasn't a threat. Maybe it was a message, a shadow trying to speak. And Freud, he finally listened. In that shadow, he saw the child he once was, the one who always tried to be understood, the one who wanted to be loved. But instead of listening to himself, he had spent his life listening to others. Now, for the first time, he didn't silence that child. He heard him. He saw him. And the child, finally, was quiet, because he had been heard. And now I ask you, when was the last time you listened to your inner child? Not silenced, listened. Not pushed away, embraced. Leave a comment. Maybe this video isn't just Freud's story. Maybe it's yours too. From Freud's silence, meaning began to bloom. Not a solution, not clarity, but a new direction. There was no longer a need to fill the emptiness. Now, he made space for it. And that was the beginning of healing. Depression wasn't an enemy. It was an echo of emotions that had never been seen. And Freud no longer tried to suppress the echo. He listened to it like a melody. His past, his losses, his loneliness. They weren't random. They were part of the same song. And for the first time, he listened. But the journey didn't end there. It was just beginning. Now let me ask you, does silence scare you? Are you afraid to hear what your feelings are trying to say? Or are you finally ready to listen? Because this isn't just a video. It's a call to inner transformation. Sometimes life doesn't feel real. It's like walking through a dream. But it's not a dream. It's a silent rebellion. Not loud, not clear, but it vibrates through every cell of your body. One morning, Freud turned to the window. He had spent so long looking inward. Now he looked out, and the world no longer terrified him, because he had faced what was within. And when the storm inside you calms, you finally notice the peace outside. Healing doesn't arrive as a miracle, not in a sentence, not in a moment. Healing is like noticing a fallen leaf while walking, like smiling when you finally spell a word right. And Freud began to notice the small things again, because something inside him was whispering, "I am alive." No one offered him a way out. No one said, "Come with me, I'll show you the door." But the tired child within him no longer wanted to fight. And when that child stopped struggling, the soul began to rest. He started writing again, not to prove anything, just to exist, to breathe. What he wrote wasn't theory, it was life. And one day he wrote, "If suffering is part of being, then turning it into meaning might be my only freedom." That wasn't a key to the door. It was the realization that the door opens from within. The darkness didn't destroy him. It peeled away the false layers. He no longer counted how many had left him. He no longer obsessed over being misunderstood. He wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was discovering what remained. Because when everything collapses, what's left is your essence. And once you meet your essence, your connection to the world transforms. One morning, Freud looked in the mirror. The face he knew so well was older, but also softer. The lines under his eyes didn't just tell of fatigue. They spoke of peace. They told a story of making peace with the past. That peace was the most radical thing he ever discovered. Because true peace is not with the world. It's with yourself. And Freud, finally, had made peace. He no longer needed approval. His students had left. But he didn't feel like a misunderstood genius anymore. Because he was no longer chasing greatness, he was choosing truth. And perhaps that's why his most powerful writings came after this silence. Not to prove, but to express. Not to impress, but to reveal. What he wanted to say was simple. Our greatest healing begins the moment we stop running from ourselves. Freud believed that healing begins with self-awareness, but it ends with self-acceptance. And that acceptance takes time. Sometimes years, sometimes a lifetime. But peace begins the moment you stop fighting. And Freud stopped fighting. Because there were no more enemies, not even within. And you? Are you still at war? With your feelings? With your memories? Or are you ready for peace? Not to become someone new, but to meet the person you've always been. Write in the comments. Because this is not just a narrative. This is a mirror, and the person you see in it is finally ready to be seen. The light you've been looking for? It's not out there, it's inside. So stop, listen, and finally, accept.